In 1983, a 12-year-old boy named John Davidson was living with his working-class family in Galashiels, a small town in the Scottish borders. Every morning, John delivered newspapers around his neighborhood, starting each day with a smile. He was a boy with a big dream, becoming a professional soccer player. At school, John played as a goalkeeper, and many believed he had real talent and a promising future ahead of him. John's father, David, fully supported that dream. He never missed a match, always standing on the sidelines to cheer John on. He even went out of his way to look for information about talent scouts who might one day come to John's school. One afternoon, after John pulled off a brilliant save and helped his team win a match, he went with his mother, Heather, to buy a new school uniform. On the way home, she gently reminded him to focus on his studies and stay out of trouble, especially since he was about to start secondary school at Galashiels Academy. At first, life felt normal. John went to school, spent time with friends, and shared meals with his family like any other kid. Then, things started to change. One day in class, John struggled while reading out loud. He began making repeated movements and sounds he could not control. These tics came suddenly and kept happening without rhythm or warning. Feeling anxious and overwhelmed, John left the classroom to calm himself in the restroom. Because the tics were becoming harder to hide, his classmates started teasing and laughing at him. This was the moment everything in his life began to change. This is I swear. That evening at dinner, David noticed John acting differently and asked if something was wrong. John brushed it off, saying he was fine, before quietly leaving the table. Over the weekend, John planned to invite a girl named Carrie to the movies. But instead of coming alone, Carrie showed up with her mother, who immediately scolded John for asking her daughter out when school had just started, and they barely knew each other. Worried about her daughter, Carrie's mother decided to stay and watch the movie with them. Inside the theater, John's tics returned. Without realizing it, he began repeating lines from the movie out loud, including something inappropriate. To Carrie, it sounded like John was deliberately saying something crude to her. She became angry and stormed out. Her mother then harshly berated John until he was kicked out of the cinema. From that moment on, John's condition worsened. His tics became more intense, and he developed echolalia, repeating words and sounds uncontrollably and without warning. At school one day during lunch, John noticed Carrie talking about him with her friends. He tried to ignore it, but ended up sitting near the headmaster by accident. Unable to control his tics and echolalia, John suddenly blurted out insults and even spat in the headmaster's direction.
Fucking shit!
Horrified, John immediately apologized. Instead of showing understanding, the headmaster responded with physical punishment, striking John's hands with a belt. Rather than helping, it only made John's condition worse. When John learned that a talent scout was coming to evaluate his skills as a goalkeeper, the pressure only made his symptoms spiral further out of control. He tried to calm himself, knowing how important the match was for his future. His coach noticed something was wrong and pulled John aside before the game, urging him to stay focused. The stakes were high, especially with the scout in attendance and John's father watching from the stands. Once the match began, everything fell apart. A lingering hand injury and relentless tics disrupted John's performance, and he struggled badly on the field. It did not take long for the scout to lose interest. Frustrated and unimpressed, he left early, convinced the trip had been a complete waste. From the sidelines, David watched in disappointment. He had placed so much hope in John's future as a soccer player, and seeing him fail was painful. At home, that frustration boiled over. David vented his anger to his wife, blaming John's poor performance for crushing those dreams. That night at dinner, John's condition worsened even more. When an uncontrollable tic caused him to spit toward his father, his mother sent him away from the table. Furious and overwhelmed, David decided to leave the house, while Heather quietly told John to eat alone by the fireplace.
Just like currants.
Fucking rabbit shite! John!
Later on. At the football. What's this nonsense starting about?
Oh, John!
No.
Not long after, John got into a fight at school with a classmate who felt insulted by something John had blurted out. John tried to explain that he had no control over his words, that they came out because of the tics and echolalia he was experiencing. The school principal refused to believe him, accusing John of pretending for attention and threatening to expel him. No matter how much John insisted he was not acting and did not understand what was happening to him, no one seemed willing to listen. Soon after that, John and his siblings were told by their mother that their father had left the family. In John's mind, there was only one explanation. He believed his father had walked away because of him. Crushed by guilt and emotional pain, John wandered into a river, intending to end his life. He was rescued in time and later woke up in the hospital, weak, confused, and still unable to control the neurological symptoms racking his body. John blamed himself relentlessly for his father's departure, but Heather stayed by his side, reassuring him that none of this was his fault. She promised she would do everything she could to help him get better. 13 years later, in 1996, John was 25 years old and still living with his mother when he finally received an official diagnosis. Doctors confirmed that he had Tourette's syndrome. They explained that there was no real cure, only medication to help reduce the symptoms. Even with treatment, the tics and inappropriate outbursts never fully stopped, continuing to follow John and shadow his life with constant shame and frustration. One day, John's old school friend Murray returned to Galashiels from Australia after his mother Dottie was diagnosed with liver cancer. Murray invited John over for dinner, an invitation John tried hard to avoid, worried about how people might react to his condition. Dottie, who worked as a mental health nurse, quickly noticed how uncomfortable John seemed and asked about the medication he was taking. Once she understood what he was dealing with, she told her family that she wanted John to stay with them for a while. Murray and his father were hesitant, especially with Dottie being seriously ill, but she was determined to help John while she still could. That evening, John told his mother that Dottie had promised to help him and wanted him to move into her home. Heather was skeptical, suspecting that Dottie might be expecting John to take care of her because of her illness. Even so, John insisted on leaving, and Heather reluctantly let him go. After moving in with Murray's family, John was slowly taken off his medication under Dottie's supervision. She also helped him understand that he did not need to apologize for his tics around people who knew his behavior was uncontrollable. When Heather later met Dottie, she thanked her for helping John despite being so unwell, though she asked that John be encouraged to visit home more often because she missed him. Not long after, Murray took John to a nightclub. John tried to relax, dance, and socialize, but during a sudden tic episode, he accidentally knocked a drink out of another man's hand, triggering a large fight.
Sorry, pal. I raped a girl in there. I didn't rape anyone.
John ended up spending the night in police custody, and Dottie later told him that he would have to face trial for assault. Realizing that John needed structure and focus, Dottie suggested he keep busy and asked if he would consider working at the local community center as an assistant to the elderly building caretaker. The next day, John met Tommy, the caretaker, a calm man who showed no reaction to John's sudden movements or outbursts. Tommy explained the job and showed John around the building. He then asked John to make a cup of tea, and to everyone's surprise, John did it perfectly. Tommy praised him for it. But during another tic episode, John accidentally struck Tommy's dog. Tommy immediately warned him that he would not hesitate to retaliate if the dog was harmed again. Shaken by the warning, John apologized and left, convinced that his chance at the job was over. On his way home, John stopped by his usual grocery store to buy a newspaper and some candy. While reading the paper outside, he lost control of his tics and accidentally hurled an insult at a woman leaving the store. He apologized right away and tried to explain his condition, but she was furious. Not long after, when John returned home, he found the house completely dark and began searching for Dottie. It turned out the family had switched off the lights to surprise him. They told John that he had been accepted for the job with Tommy, and even better, the lump on Dottie's liver was benign, not cancer. To celebrate all the good news, Dottie told John to go out and buy whatever food he wanted. When John walked into a restaurant one evening, he unknowingly crossed paths with the woman he had insulted earlier, though he did not recognize her. Still holding on to her anger, she ordered 2 men to attack John and teach him a lesson. He was beaten severely and left with serious injuries.
Push this. Sat. Fucking. Move.
John was rushed back to the hospital, this time with Dottie by his side. She reassured him that his job would still be waiting once he recovered. Overwhelmed and exhausted by his condition, John broke down in tears, feeling completely worn out by everything he had been through. After some time, John recovered and finally began working as Tommy's assistant. He slowly adjusted to his responsibilities at the community center, helping Tommy with daily tasks. John opened up about his struggles, explaining how losing control of his tics often caused misunderstandings and made people see him as strange. Tommy helped him see things differently. He believed the real problem was not Tourette's itself, but how little people understood it. He encouraged John to stop worrying about judgment and instead educate others about Tourette's syndrome so they could learn to understand and accept him as he was. When the day of John's trial arrived, he was unable to complete the court oath without swearing at the judge due to uncontrollable tics, and he was removed from the witness stand. Worse still, the judge refused to recognize Tourette's syndrome as a relevant medical condition in the assault case. Tommy then stepped forward as a character witness, explaining that John's behavior was never intentional and could not be controlled because of his condition. He described what it was like working alongside John, where uncontrollable tics occurred almost constantly, yet John still worked hard and did his best to carry out every responsibility. Tommy also pointed out how impossible it would be for John to be faking such a condition. No sane person would pretend to have something that only brought humiliation, rejection, and physical harm. If John were pretending, there would be no reason he could not continue his education, build relationships, or start a family. Instead, John was clearly struggling to live a normal life, not because he wanted attention, but because he did not want to be labeled as crazy or disabled for something he could not control. Tommy added that if a blind man had spilled a drink in a nightclub, people would have understood and shown restraint, and that same understanding should be extended to John as well. Faced with this reasoning, the courtroom fell silent, and the case was ultimately dismissed.
If a blind man walks into a bar and crashes into another guy, would it end up in court? He is the nicest, kindest, most respectful young man I have ever met.
Later that night, John went to Tommy's house and found him lying motionless on the floor. Tommy had suffered a heart attack and passed away. In the days that followed, Dottie encouraged John to rent his own place and start living independently. John agreed and moved into a small apartment, trying to adjust to life on his own. Not long after, a man approached John and offered him a job dealing drugs. John initially refused, but his financial struggles pushed him to accept. Unfortunately, his tics betrayed him. Without realizing it, John blurted out that he was carrying drugs, and the police immediately arrested him. In a surprising turn, the package turned out to be nothing more than a bag of sugar. John was released, free of all charges. Dottie brought John back to her home and encouraged him to read and learn everything he could about Tourette's syndrome. After Tommy's death, John assumed he would lose his job, but instead, he was unexpectedly promoted to take Tommy's position. He was also given a new place to live, Tommy's former home, allowing him to leave the apartment behind. One day, a family from the local hospital was referred to John along with their daughter Lucy, who was also living with Tourette's syndrome. John allowed Lucy to fully express herself through her tics and outbursts, which helped her feel relieved and understood. Lucy was able to manage her symptoms fairly well, and she was genuinely happy to meet someone who shared the same condition. John, in turn, found comfort in sharing his own experiences with her. That meeting became a turning point. John realized that his life experiences could help others, just as Tommy had once suggested. After visiting Tommy's grave, John began organizing workshops at the community center focused on Tourette's syndrome. He invited people with the condition to share their stories and helped educate families and loved ones so they could better understand and accept it. John wanted those living with Tourette's to feel supported and included, able to live their lives without shame or isolation. John later expanded his efforts by giving talks at schools and police stations, raising awareness and improving understanding of the condition. His dedication eventually led him to Holyrood Palace, where in 2019 he received an MBE in recognition of his work supporting people with Tourette's syndrome. After receiving the honor, John visited his mother to show it to her and explain why he had not invited her to the ceremony, choosing instead to attend with Dottie and her husband. Heather apologized for being harsh and impatient with him when he was younger, but John had never held any anger or resentment toward her. In 2023, John was invited by researchers at Nottingham University to test a new therapeutic device. The device successfully calmed his tics, allowing him to remain still in the university library, something that had once felt nearly impossible. Overcome with emotion, John struggled to hold back tears. For the first time in his life, he felt truly calm, free from anxiety and uncontrollable movements. On the train ride home, John struck up a conversation with a woman, a quiet moment that reflected the confidence he had gained through his growing ability to manage his condition. So the moral of the story is sometimes the deepest pain comes not from hatred, but from being misunderstood by the people who were supposed to care the most.